Okay, thanks for tuning in. We are in the 991.1. That's a 2015 911 Turbo S today. I bought this car new back in 2015. I actually bought it, I leased it off the lot. It was just sitting there, and it pretty much had the exact spec that I was looking for. So I just showed up, traded in the car that I was driving at the time, which was an E63 AMG, and decided to get my dream car, which is a 911 Turbo. So, what the fuck is going on here? Anyway, so yeah, I paid, I leased it, and then I purchased the lease at the end of the lease period. So I've had this car since new. Technically, I bought it twice from Porsche. I actually bought it from the same guy that was at one dealership, and then just by chance he was working at the other dealership that I took it in to buy it out of the lease from. These are great cars. The 991 is at the time when this car came out, everyone, or this generation came out, everyone kind of panned on it for being a little too big. But they've only gotten bigger since then. So to me, this feels like a pretty good size. My 997 GT3 is smaller, but that's it almost feels a little too small at this point for being a sports car. I don't. City and talking at the same time is kind of hard, just because there's so many idiots around and slow moving traffic. So I bought this car out of the lease, and the residual was pretty reasonable, and I've obviously had it since it was new, so there was no unknowns. It was dealership serviced until the end of the warranty period and all that stuff. So, you know, it's a good car. I've never had any problems with it. There were a couple of minor warranty issues, like one of the windows was leaking and they resealed it. And there were a couple of sensors that went bad over the last 8 years, almost 9 years. So I think that's pretty reasonable. Prices on these for used vehicles are coming down. This car is getting close to the bottom of the depreciation curve. And the way it works with Porsches is these higher end models like Turbo S's, people generally tend to avoid putting miles onto them. I don't know why. Like this one has 34,900, so almost 35,000 miles. Why people keep the miles off. That doesn't really like preserve the value or anything unless it's less than 1,000. So, you know, these are all around the same price, which is, you know, around, I would say, between $115,000 to $140,000, depending on the spec. This one is a fully spec'd out model. I think the only thing that it's missing or like the folding mirrors and a couple of other things that I wouldn't really want. But it's got the ceramic brakes, it's got the S package, which includes Sport Chrono and the bump and power and all that stuff. So it's and it's got the premium like mesh style wheels and 20 inches. So yeah, this was the perfect spec for me. I think if I were to, you know, be in the market for a 991 at this point, start looking now just to get a feel for the kind of options I would want and the colors that I like, and to just keep an eye on things, you know, track the auctions. The way that the used pricing works for Porsches is there's a dip, and then there's like a low valley that the prices go into once the cars are like, you know, over 5 years old, and then it kind of stays low for the next 5 to 10 years. So if it hasn't bottomed yet, it'll probably bottom within the next year or two, and then probably just stay at that level. So I would say that, you know, around the 10-year mark is where you start looking at the best value for used cars, especially the higher spec cars with the carbon ceramics and, you know, all the nice shit on the interior, like the full leather or Alcantara if you like it. This one has full carbon fiber on, you know, almost every option. I think there are a couple of options that are, or a couple of pieces that weren't in the option package, but this is pretty much most of the available carbon fiber bits. But yeah, Porsche really, like on new cars, Porsche really rips you off on those kinds of cosmetic options, and we all know this. So, you know, once they become 5 to 10 years old, the prices start getting really attractive, especially for well-maintained cars. There's not a huge difference in the level of maintenance in these kinds of cars because they just don't get that many miles put on them. Like I said, this one has 35,000 miles, you know, over 9 years. I mean, that's not even, that's, you know, between like 2,000 and 4,000 miles a year on average. So it's, as long as there's like oil changes and, you know, all the warranty work is done correctly, it should be fine. So, you know, just look for the dealership warranty work, and then oil changes don't really matter. As long as you go to a competent independent shop or just do the dealership, that should be fine. I know some of the special like GT3 models of this generation had big engine out or engine replacement issues that had to be addressed, so be on the lookout for that. But, you know, as far as like turbos go for daily drivers, I don't think you can beat the value. And you know, the thing is, the newer cars and the brand new cars, they suffer from massive inflation, right? They basically track inflation. If you took the price of this car new and then calculated inflation over the past, you know, 10 years, 8 to 10 years, that's essentially what the brand new ones cost. So what that does is it provides you know, plenty of buffer for these cars to hold their value over time. Like I mentioned, they're gonna bottom out at some point, and then they're just gonna like crawl along the bottom, you know, for a while, and then eventually they become, you know, as certain examples get higher in mileage, and as people start crashing them, because second and third owners are always idiots, and they always crash these cars more often than their first owners. The remaining cars will go up in value eventually. So around, I don't know, maybe 2024 now, maybe around 2030, this car will probably start going up in value from where it was. That doesn't mean it will ever be as expensive as it was new, but it will go up from where it was, right? Because it's a proven car that hasn't, you know, been fucked with or anything like that. So, you know, if you're in the market now for a 991, you know, if you've got the cash and it's burning a hole in your pocket, I would say just get it. But if you're, you know, holding out for the correct spec and the correct color and mileage and all that stuff, I'd say you probably have another couple of years, to a few more years to get some good ones that are on the market. You know, the people who buy these used also tend to keep them for a little bit longer than the new ones, just because, you know, a lot of these releases, they get just returned off of lease, and then, you know, they get flipped, or just people go through cars really quick. So in my opinion, I don't know if this is true or not, I think like once a car gets to maybe 5 to 10 years old, the people who buy them at that point tend to keep them for a few years. They're just more like conservative people in general, right? Financially conservative people in general. So it's probably a sweet spot if you're looking to buy a car like this. as far as maintenance goes, these cars are really, really maintenance light. There aren't any major issues with 991s. You know, the motors are pretty stout. Most people, the vast majority of people don't modify these cars. They're just like executive, you know, rich people are like high-earning executive types that just want a nice Porsche to drive around in. Obviously, there's super high horsepower, crazy modified cars out there, but that's not the norm. And generally, those cars are sold with all the mods intact, since you know, they always try to like market these cars as super high horsepower when they're modified, but you don't really want that. You want something as close to stock as possible, because who knows what the previous owner did. This one is 100% stock. The only thing, as far as performance and power goes, the only thing I've done is added steel braided brake lines, because I found the factory ones to be a little mushy. So I got some aftermarket brake lines installed, and that is the only mod. I don't have a tune. I don't have any like Y pipes or plenum. Like, I don't have a Y pipe or plenum or any of that. It's running stock boost, stock turbo, stock everything, stock exhaust even, because I like. If you've watched up my other videos, you've probably noticed that I like relatively quiet exhausts, at least in my daily drivers. It just prevents you from being hassled, basically, especially in California, where that's a big deal. The cops are on the lookout for people who modify their cars and drive around like jackasses. So don't do either of those things. Don't do either of those things, and you should be fine. Another car that I would be interested in if I were in the market would be a GTS trim. Those are really, really interesting cars. You know, in the 991, at least the .1, I'm not sure about the .2, but you know, they were still naturally aspirated. You can get them in manual transmission, and generally speaking, they're spec'd really nice. They have nice interiors. It's basically a GT car for the, like a Porsche GT car for the street. You know, it's not done by the Andreas Prudinger's GT division. It's just like this car. It's a non-GT S trim for the street. But the problem is those are really hard to find. They don't make very many. Most people don't spec them because they either want to go turbo or GT3, or they just want to stick with the regular Carrera S or 4S. So the GTS is really, really rare. I think they're more desirable. That might be something you might want to check out or hold out for. But I think those will probably come with like a 10% to 15% premium over the rest of the cars. So on average, I'd say that maintenance on these kinds of cars, it's not that high. I mean, it can, obviously if something breaks because you're modifying it, it's going to cost you, but normal wear and tear and oil changes and other fluid changes, if you get them at the, you know, if you get it done at the dealership and you're not driving more than a few thousand miles a year, it's not even $1,000 a year. On average, it's very, very low. If you do your own work, you can probably get it down to like $500 a year just in parts. I haven't even had the brakes done on this car, and it's got 35k miles on the carbon ceramics. So I looked at the pads; they still have like at least 25% left. But I don't drive around really aggressively normally on this setup. Like, you don't really need to. The great thing about carbon ceramics is you can just barely tap the pedals, the brake pedal, and the car stops pretty convincingly. So, you know, the thing about Porsches is they're very sensitive to inputs. So like the steering, the brakes, the gas, everything, you barely need to touch the controls to get a lot of output from the hardware. So it's kind of like a very light touch car these days. I think the older The older cars were not like that. I think you had to manhandle them a little bit more just because they're older, and there was a lot more mechanical stuff. But everything here is like electronically boosted, and you know, everything's very sensitive. So you don't end up using a lot of like, you don't have to slam on the, like, stomp on the brakes to, you know, to get some good performance out of it. So it's just, everything's kind of overbuilt for the weight of the car, which is like 300 pounds or something, which is pretty good. I'm currently running Michelin 4S's. The stock Pirellis are total trash. I basically just drove around on boost all the time until I wore those out, and then I got the 4S's, which are awesome tires. They take a little bit of time to warm up, but the overall balance and grip, especially in Southern California where it's just, you know, sunny all the time and dry, they're phenomenal tires. Yeah, so the size of these cars is smaller than the newest 992s, bigger than the 997s, so it's, you know, as of right now, it's like a happy medium in dimensions. The turbos are a little bit wider, and they have rear wheel steering, so it's depending on how you feel about rear wheel steer, that might be a plus or a minus, but you know, they're pretty manageable size. They fit into like regular parking spots. It's not like a Lamborghini or something, you know, something exotic like that. They're pretty good size. They are obviously bigger than air-cooled cars at 997s and 996s, but there's a lot more safety technology at these cars. Like, all of the pillars have airbags in them. There's a huge panoramic roof, which is awesome. Definitely try to get that option if you can. So, you know, there are trade-offs with all that cool stuff and safety equipment, so it's a trade-off, but you know, it's a modern enough car where I believe it's worth the trade-off, and it's just something to keep in mind. So one thing that is kind of lacking in this generation of car, which they fixed in, I believe, 2016, and then the 991.2s, is the lack of CarPlay. So Bluetooth works fine as long as you have the latest software update for PCM. That works fine with my phone. I believe the earlier versions had some issues with Bluetooth connectivity and like dropouts and freezes and stuff, but mine has always been pretty reliable. The only complaint I have is when it connects to your phone, it takes a minute to like sync up, and then you have to like change it by hand, which kind of sucks, honestly, but you get used to it. But you can always go aftermarket, and Porsche is actually, I hear they're working on the PCM upgrade, which is like a replacement head unit for older cars. I believe right now the 997s have them available, but basically it just replaces your stock, or the stock head unit with a Porsche branded unit that does CarPlay and is a bit more modern, has faster hardware and better software. So I don't know what they're going to do with these generation cars. I really doubt they're going to give you a whole new head unit. Maybe just a module that you can add on for CarPlay, but yeah, we'll see, I guess. Either way, it's like a $3,000 thing, so it's not cheap, but also not like outrageous, especially since it comes from Porsche. Again, you can always just go aftermarket if that's what you want. But yeah, my general point is just that the used market for 991 generation cars, including, you know, like this one, the Turbo S and Turbo, they're getting to be pretty reasonable. I think the normal Carrera S's are like down into the 70,000 range, which to me seems like a pretty good deal. I think the 997.2s are like in the 50 to 60 range, depending on specs. So, you know, they're coming down into an area where an enthusiast who doesn't make a boatload of money can afford one, which is basically where I was, like, I don't know, when I was maybe 30 years old. So that would, like, 30-year-old me would have loved a car like this at between 50 and 100K. Like, that would be, you know, obviously not a Turbo S, but like a Carrera S, or even a base model, you know, for 50K. That would have been great. I'm 40 now, and a lot of time has passed between then and now, but you know, younger me would have loved it. It would have been in my budget. And it's also generally just a low-key car, so especially around LA. Like, I'm in Santa Monica right now. Nobody even looks twice at this car, which is, again, either a positive or a negative, depending on your personality and the amount of attention you want to attract. But to me, that's a positive. You know, there's tons and tons and tons of Porsches around, so, you know, you could either get a nice subdued color like white, black, silver, or one of the paint-to-spec PTS car or paint-to-sample cars, and go mild to wild. So it's really up to you. One thing that you should know is insurance for these cars is actually very, very reasonable. They don't get stolen often. They're hard to steal. There's no, like, black market for parts on these cars, since nobody's, like, getting their car nobody's getting their 911 fixed at the local chop shop that sells, you know, or local shady mechanic that sells chop shop parts. So this car is actually less to insure every month than my Toyota Tacoma, which nobody believes me, but that is the truth of the matter. This is not even $100 a month on my insurance policy, and the Tacoma is, like, I think it's $100 a month for the Tacoma. So it's kind of wild that 911s are so cheap to insure. But again, if you're over 30 and you're driving a 911, you know, they basically have no reason to rip you off on insurance. Obviously, your zip code has a lot to do with it too. If you live in the suburbs, I'm sure it's even cheaper. But I'm in the city, and that's what I pay. And that's, oh yeah, that's for full coverage, everything maxed out. I don't fuck around when it comes to insurance, because if you get into an accident with this car, people are going to get all sorts of ideas. Yeah, one of the great things about turbo 911s is the low-end torque is awesome for driving around town. I think it develops max torque at like 2100 RPM or something ridiculously low like that. And this is I mean, it's a pretty, it's like a mid-range 7000 redline. So, you know, it's right in the middle of where a motor would be. I mean, it's a 3.8 turbo, so, you know, I think the GT3's redline at 7500 of this generation, something like that, maybe higher. I don't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, the torque builds very fast, and then it just pulls all the way to redline. The horsepower does not drop off. In fact, the really, you know, basic intake mods that you can do, like plenum and white pipe and air filter and maybe intercoolers, I mean, those add like 100-something horsepower to a stock tuned car, and I think even more with an aftermarket tune, like a Cobb or something, which is just crazy. So yeah, these motors are pretty nuts. The 991.2 is even crazier. They have upgraded, or I should say better, turbos from the factory, and I believe bigger injectors from the factory. So you've already got a couple of things done to those cars already that you would otherwise have to do. And that plays into the value of the 991.1s as well. Like they're not quite as high potential when it comes to developing power with bolt-ons. So you know, I don't know, they're maybe like 10 to 15% less than the facelift cars. So great value. If you you know, if you're not planning on building a 700 horsepower monster, you might want to look at that 15% savings.